When working with the coil construction method, similar to the pinch pot method, you want to start by making sure that your clay doesn't have any cracks or crevices in it. But really, it's not a huge deal because you are going to rip off pieces of this to construct. So during class, I have demonstrated how to add coils onto a pinch pot, but it's also possible to just start the whole structure with coils. So you want to rip off a piece of clay and roll it into a snake. So you start rolling it between your hands. And then once it gets big and sticks out past your palm, you start rolling it on your paper. It is frustrating because the paper moves. So you can start by using one hand to hold the paper down. Notice I'm spreading my fingers out to be able to manipulate the clay into a longer snake. And I can push down to make it less of a flattened shape and more of a cylinder so it rolls more freely. So it just takes time and practice. If you're going to use something to hold the paper down, I would not suggest using your water cup or your other clay, but you can get the hang of this eventually. So a good rule of thumb for beginner coilers is you don't want to roll your coil too thick or too thin. So a good ballpark I tell students is you don't want the coil to be any thinner than your pinky finger. Understanding that your pinky finger and your neighbor's and mine are all different sizes, it's just a good ballpark to go through. It's okay if you end up rolling off of the construction paper. But when you start constructing, you definitely want to make sure you keep it on the construction paper. So I'm going to roll from the middle out so I don't get any thin spots. It's about the size of my pinky, so I'm going to start. So when you begin coiling, you start by roughing up the interior edge, or what you think is going to be the interior. If that is confusing, you'll see what I mean in a minute. So I can just rough up the edge to open up the clay body, and then I'm going to add water to dissolve the little particles of clay. Right, so when we rough up the surface, it's called scoring, and then we use slip to attach the pieces of clay to itself. So slip is just liquid clay, which we're making on the clay as we're creating. I'm going to start my coil for the bottom of my bowl by making a swirl. And then I'm going to quickly rough up the outer edge of my coil as well. And adding water. And you want to push this firmly together like you're making a really snug cinnamon bun. Okay? And sometimes the score marks aren't lining up with the score marks. And as long as you're diligent, which means really aware of making sure that you're keeping track of your tasks, that you're pushing it together, you're good, okay? So you can make the base as big or as small as you want. Remember that you're making a vessel. The functionality of the vessel or the purpose is up to you, the creator. So if I made this as my base, it's a good coffee cup size, I'm going to push this together. I'm going to smooth the end of the spiral in. And I'm going to flip it over to check what it looks like on the back side. At this stage, your coils, again, are going to get manipulated and smushed around. So as long as your craftsmanship is structurally sound, you can worry about the craftsmanship of your aesthetics or the finished polished work once you're done with the sculpture. So build it first and then worry about, is it smooth? Because at this stage, you're just going to keep picking it up and moving it around, okay? I'm going to put this off to the side and roll another snake. Can be the same size or a different size. Start in your hands. I like to start with it in a ball so you don't get any super narrow or super wide spots. So once it goes past your palms, you can go ahead and put it on your paper. If you're really having a tough time with rolling on the paper, you can roll on your desk. Just keep in mind you don't want to build your coils on your desk because it will stick. Also, please remember to wash your table for the next student. So I can make this one just a little bit thinner. There are advanced coiling techniques. This is just the basics. You might be thinking, why can't I just roll out all of my coils and then attach them? Because the longer your clay sits out of the bag, the drier it gets. And if it has more surface area, it dries out even faster. So a coil has a lot of surface area. If you look in the tool bucket, there's a tool that looks like it has like a rake or a really small fork kind of texture to it. You can use that to rough up your coils as well, but the paintbrush bristles, if you grabbed one of the sharpened paintbrushes from the clay bucket, it works really well because it roughs it up just enough. And put water on our score marks. And then we attach. So we start by pushing down firmly. This is why you want to work on the construction paper so it doesn't get stuck to your table. So going around, pushing the coils firmly down. Again, the score marks aren't always lining up with the score marks, but as long as your pressure is good, you're pretty good. And then when I come over to overlap the coil again, I need to rough up the surface and add a little bit more water before I attach. So you keep this process up, you keep coiling around. It's really easy to go very tall very fast. I'm not going as fast as I could because I'm doing a tutorial demonstration, but you can see the walls start to form. So you put this off to the side, or if you're rolling on your table, you just slide the whole paper off. Rip off another chunk of clay. Make sure you're not working with something too large, about the size of like a rubber ball that you get out of a vending machine. That's a pretty good size. Sticking out of my palms. So I like to go from the center to the edges to try to keep it even, using your fingers, spreading them apart. It sounds very Play-Doh, but it is. It's good to know. Try to keep your coil a little bit similar to your last or most recent coil. You can start to go thinner, but once you start going thinner, you can't go back to being thick because the whole structure will collapse. So you rough up the clay. Leaving little tiny particles. Then we do it to the surface we're attaching it to. And then you add your water. You can use your paintbrush to put the water on. I bet you could even dunk your paintbrush in the water and rough it up and add the water at the same time if you're looking to save a step. So we're going to start where we ended. Line up our ends, pushing down firmly. Remember, work on top of your construction paper. And you can see that the structure is starting to get taller. Okay, so you keep going up and up and up until you get to a point where you're happy with it for the coil structure. And remember, you can choose to start with the pinch pot as the base. As you're working, I recommend picking this up and looking for any gaps on the edges. Notice it's very floppy right now, so just be careful. You're not gonna smoosh it. Because if you think you're gonna glaze this to make a functional drinking vessel, for example, you'd want to make sure there are no gaps between the clay, because then it won't work. Okay? All right, so the next video is how to attach figurative or sculptural elements to a bowl. No, that's not my password.